All right, Nat Stas, thank you for joining. And let's have you start by telling us a little bit about your background in the swine industry.
Yeah, hey Lexi. Thanks for the invitation to talk with you here today. So, I guess background, like Lexi said, my name's Nat Stas. Currently, I'm technical service director for with PIC, commercial swine production genetics company, obviously. But my background into the pork industry is I wouldn't say necessarily unique in any way. I grew up in a mixed animal practice veterinary family. We were hobby farmers at best. Grew up in Western Pennsylvania. Um, Showed pigs from the time I was 7, 8 years old or so. In your county 4-H basically. And that's kind of where I got my start. Really started to get interested in it. Had some good mentors, had anywhere from maybe 5 to 10 show pig sows at one point because we all love to try that at one point in time in our lives. But, different mentors in the industry actually sat down with Randy Shipley at one point. I'm sure he has no idea or remembers the conversation, but he said, if you want to kind of make anything of your life or get into the pork industry legitimately, look at the commercial industry. Actually got me in touch with Randy Bowman, who would have been at the mash offs and still is at the mash offs. And, my brother was actually going through veterinary school and doing PERS research. And after graduating from Penn State, I just jumped ship right into the Midwest. I figured if I'm going to do it, I'm going to jump into the heart of it, and moved out and worked at the mash offs for a few years in commercial production. That led me to University of Illinois to get my graduate degree because I always had an interest in genetics and that kind of side of the business. And that kind of what led me, research with Dr. Mike Ellis there. And that's what led me ultimately to my career at PIC for almost the last 8 years and the growth with that. So kind of a mild show pig background, showed county fair, obviously, like a lot of us do, state fair, and did a little bit of national shows towards the end. And then my younger brother, kind of did more of that as we got more involved in the show pig industry. But that's kind of where I got my start and fell in love with pigs, I guess.
Awesome. And Nat, Technical Services Director for PIC is something that you've recently taken on over the past few years, but you have a vast array of experience and technical experience. So I always think of you as the ventilation guy.
Yeah.
But is that what your master's was in? And then what really like technical experience are you really passionate about? And could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I don't know. I could remember having interviews and conversations before I took my role at PIC with Matt Culberson and Dan Hamilton, and both of them just generically asking me what I know about ventilation. And I was in an interview, so I'm trying to brag a little bit and say, well, I can't adjust every controller out there in pig barns, but I think I know my way around most of them and things. And 8 years later, now I realize they were looking for someone to really take that and learn, right? And then I go all the way back, and I lived with 6 engineers. I was the single like ag major in my house that I lived in college, and all of my friends were engineers. So I don't have an engineering degree. I don't have an engineering background, but I have influence that way. And I think it was my degrees were in animal science option at Penn State. Thought a lot of people go to vet school, nutritionist, geneticist, etc. My education beyond that would be kind of as a geneticist, master's level graduate degree with Dr. Mike Ellis. But really, his lab was production science, production efficiency, things like that. Didn't really have a lot to do with ventilation. A lot of my research was genetics and reproduction and sire line trials and things like that. Um, but I think it kind of speaks to just understanding a company, what their needs are, and continually learning, right? And so people in PIC told me, through question asking, said we need help with ventilation. And I started making phone calls and studying and, learning from the people that know about pig barn ventilation. And so I don't know how I'm considered the ventilation guru at PIC, but that's kind of where it sits today. And I just learned, went out and had a passion for it and learned it. Um, I, as far as the passion, I do like ventilation. I like the complexity of it, although trying to simplify it. And I think that's really where my passion is, taking that really high level knowledge and being able to disseminate it down into execution on farm, right? how do we take all this research, this data, all this knowledge we have, and put it into reality, right? That's where my passion lies. And that's why I think, in the technical service world, that's where it fits best for me.
I love that example too, because one of my pet peeves, and I'm not sure if you hear this a lot, but I hate being told, well, I didn't learn that in school.
Yep.
Well, guess what? Like that's okay. Not many people did. And it's the drive in order to learn it on your own or figure out what you did. I know you spent a ton of time in barns as well. So as technical service director, not only I know you as the ventilation expert, but you know wean to finish like the back of your hand. And you've worked with the best producers in the country in order to learn that. And now you lead a team. Like, what are some of those things you teach or support your team on leaning into their passions and looking at certain areas that they're interested in and can make an impact like you did?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, that's in this new role, I challenge myself with that every day, right? Because previous I was an individual contributor. My goals were to make our customers better. And now it's make my team stronger and better to ultimately make the customer better, right? And so it's that leadership kind of mentality with that. And I think it does have to start with a passion, right? So, whether that's through question asking or, just exploring through conversation with each employee, what are they really interested in? Because if someone's interested, they're going to go out on their own, they're going to learn it, they're going to, really dedicate time to understanding it. And it could be hobbies, but then how do they relate to their daily job, right? And maybe there's some similarities and some crossover there. Try to pull that out of people and then guiding them into those, right? Well, how can that relate to our business? How can that relate to the customer success? That's really what it is. But you need to be a self driver. I think we'll get into it a little bit of how the show pig industry kind of helped the career, but be your own success, right? I mean, speak up, say, this is what I want out of a career. This is what I want out of life. And you're not going to have every answer. I still don't know what I want to do for a living, right? A lot of people say that, but each day challenge yourself to learn something new and speak up and say, this is what I want out of my career, and finding a good company that supports that is important, right? So I think that's what it comes at is, being a self driver and whatever company you work for, understanding, they have constraints, they have areas they need to get better at, and become passionate about one of those areas and help them get better, right?
Nat, you led into my next question is you grew up in a show pig setting, showing at different levels. Do you think that contributes to maybe your competitiveness of, okay, I can do this. I am gonna go out and take it on myself and be self-competitive. And what other aspects did show pigs help lead you to where you are today?
Yeah, I think it's good to be competitive as long as you can harness it right into positivity. Because if you're too competitive, that can come across negatively sometimes as well if you can't get along with team members and work with them things. But so there's some level of positive competitiveness, I think. And the show pig industry is, to me, if you're going to be successful, you got to ask for support. You got to be a part of a team. There's other people in your corner helping you, but at the end of the day, it comes down to you too, right? You're the one leading it, right? You may have support, you may have other team members, you may have a ton of people to thank at the end of the day, but you're in that ring yourself, and ultimately it comes down to you, right? And so it's that, to me, it's almost like that perfect balance of leading up to it as a team, and then you've taken it across the finish line. So it's just not completely individually focused. And so but you get both levels. You get to be a part of a really driven team, and you get that individual, hey, it's on my shoulders now, I got to run with it. So and I think that speaks to success in a career, because you're always going to be working with team members. That could be people you report directly to, or they report directly to you. That could be customers, right? They may not be directly team members necessarily, depending on how you define that, but there's people a part of your success. But at the end of the day, it does still come down to you.
Absolutely. I've never really thought of showing pigs in that aspect. It's a team sport, but an individual sport. And I think you just made that connection perfectly. So, one of the things I wanted to ask you about is the fact that you moved across the country and you just packed up and did it. You've lived in multiple places, not only for school, but in your career too. And now you get to be back in your home area. But how did you find the courage to pack up those bags and make that move? And what would you give to people contemplating that right now?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, like probably a lot of us that are in the ag industry, show pig or commercial or whatever, we grew up in small communities. Everyone knows everyone. There's some comfortability to that. You've been going through the same mechanic for generations, right? They watch kids grow up, things like that. I mean, I had all that. I come from a very large family that in our community, everyone knows our name. They're who's your dad, who's your uncle, et cetera, so on and so forth. And I loved it. I mean, our family had a great reputation, but I didn't. I wanted to be an individual too, so that was a piece of it, right? Because it was always, well, you're related to so and so type of situation. And honestly, I mean, in Western Pennsylvania, there's not commercial industry, and I trusted some of my mentors to give me advice and where to go, and I wanted to dive headfirst into it. But the community I grew up in, like I have friends to this day that if you drive an hour away from home, that's probably a long weekend trip, right? To me, the world is there, right? And don't be afraid of that. I never thought I would move back to Western Pennsylvania until I met my wife, and she convinced me to do it. But I think everybody should move, almost beyond driving distance or a day trip from home. I don't care if it's for 6 months or 6 years. You could always come back, right? And so take that leap of faith, become an individual, figure out what you're truly passionate about and what drives you, and then you'll have better appreciation for that. And figure out your industry. If that's the commercial industry, that's great. Get into the thick of it, right? Don't just stay on the outskirts or the corners, but really get into the thick of it and learn, and don't be afraid to go out and be that, become an individual realistically. And I think it'll teach people really what they want and value out of life, right? Because now that I'm back, I probably appreciate my family a little bit more than I used to, right? I took them for granted. So, but most of it was I didn't have commercial production in my backyard, right? Maybe a few hours away, but I had to, if I wanted to learn about it, I had to go do it. And I had to move to do that.
And I think living in the middle of a city, you learn about agriculture in a different way than you would in a small town. When living in my small town, I pass farms all the time,
Yeah.
and you can't walk into a gas station without running into, your local farmer. And when I lived in a city, that's not the case. And did you live in Nashville as well?
I was in Hendersonville, but I
Okay,
mean, you're
so right
talking
outside Nashville.
6, 8 miles from Nashville. Yeah.
Yeah, and that is just a whole different aspect of life. And I know you don't think like going to Nashville, Tennessee, you're going to learn about agriculture, but walking away from spending time in Nashville, Tennessee, it's eye-opening of how agriculture really makes an impact in the lives of most people who don't have the opportunity to live in small town USA like you and I do.
Yeah,
So it's a cool perspective.
for sure.
Okay, so knowing that we are encouraging our young people to move and to get into the thick of things with their career and jump into whatever they're passionate about. Is there any other piece of advice that you want to share with young showmen? And I know you're involved in the Pennsylvania swine circuit. You work with a lot of youth, whether it be with your career or personally. What are those pieces of advice that you want to share with those students that you work with?
Yeah, it's hard to narrow it down to a couple or one or two or whatever. I think of um, for one, it's very mentor driven, but you don't have to have a single mentor you give all your credit to, right? There's stages in life, right? I go back to my father and my parents, right? And I talk about them a lot. And then, graduate or college, I had a great advisor there. And I think one thing he told me was show up and work hard every day and you'll never have to worry about a job in your life, right? And that's really simple to say, but I think what he was meaning was show up and work hard and be passionate about it and you'll never have to worry about a job in your life, right? My father told me at one point, find a career that you like 51% of the time, because then it's worth going back to, because we're always told find a job you love and you'll never work a day in your life. I don't know if that job's out there, right? There's going to be tough days and days you're like, why am I doing this? But as long as there's more days that you enjoy it than you don't enjoy it, I think it's worth going back to. So I think that's part of it. And, find an industry, ideally with commercial swine, obviously, because we need good, hard workers and critical thinkers, but that there's growth opportunity, right? And continually educating yourself. And we think about education in such a formal sense, whether it's degrees or universities, but I have no engineering background, right? And I continually learn about that area. So I don't care. There's so much opportunity. What I love about the commercial swine industry is I don't care if you have an eighth grade education or you have veterinary degrees and multiple PhDs. You are, if you work hard and learn, you can earn respect and you can go very far in a career, right? And so, I think look at your life in those stages and say, what steps do I need to take today to set that up for the future? And I think another piece that ties into the show pig industry is the networking, right? You got them breed pigs or buy pigs or, talk to boar stud owners and order semen. All that's networking, right? And our industry, even though it seems large and as you get into like a genetics company, we're global. It seems huge. It's so small, right? And so, it's that Randy Shipley to Randy Bowman to Dan Hamilton, like just making all those connections, right? And these are probably names that certain folks recognize that'll listen to this, but it's making those connections and tying them together and doing that networking. So don't ever underestimate a conversation or a handshake or a pat on the back by someone, right? Because if you make an impression, they'll remember you and that'll continue on. So
Awesome. And Nat, all those people that you mentioned, I think one of the coolest things about our industry is they want to support and help others. So, in the case that someone is listening and says, I want to be Nat Stas, I want to have the career like he did, what's the best way to connect with you or a company like PIC and be able to jump into a career like you've had?
yeah, reach out, right? I mean, I, it doesn't have to be me, but just anybody. Just continually ask, hey, this is what I'm interested in, and who would you point me in the right direction, right? It's we separate the industries like verbally, but they're so intertwined, right? There's a lot of show pig people or show pig people in general that are in the commercial industry, whether that's with a producer or an allied industry, nutrition company, genetics, pharmaceutical. Um, just start asking questions and reach out to people. And that could be totally cold calling. I mean, believe me, I'm a very introverted person. If you talk to my family, I'm very shy. Um, but you got to build that courage and get over that and not be afraid to reach out to someone and say, hey, this is what I'm thinking, right? And that could be me or anybody else. Reach out and make contact, to anybody, and you'll tie the pieces together and get in touch with the right person. But don't be afraid to bug people. Um, a lot of people in our industry love to help the next generation, and I think that's an awesome thing. So, um, don't be afraid to reach out to myself or anybody else, and we're happy to help however we can.
Awesome. And last question for you. You now are back home in Pennsylvania. You have started a family. You have a career that path that has been in multiple different aspects. And looking at the swine industry as a whole or the future as a whole, what makes you the most excited about it?
I mean, I think it's probably been like this for a while, right? But it's the up and coming generations, right, to push us forward. The ag industry in general gets uh, probably a traditional stamp put on them, and this is how we used to do things in the green pastures and the red barns. But the industry's advanced so far past that, and I think it's probably the progressiveness to some extent of the show pig industry, right? Because good or bad, that's always changing, right?
Yeah.
The trends and the things we're selecting for and breeding for and all that. And it just pushes us as well in our everyday life and in the commercial industry to get better and ask those questions, how we can improve this process or this situation. So that's what gets me excited. I mean, I'm at meetings this week with some team members, and we have some young ones in the room, and they're listening and learning, but we continually challenge them to, how are you seeing things? How can we better ourselves, right? Who's going to push us forward into the next evolution? Because we all perceive stuff differently, and we don't want to just get in our groove and ride our careers out. We want to make sure the next generation is making us better. So that's what excites me about it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining, Nat. We appreciate your time and safe travels home from your meetings.
Absolutely. Thanks, Lexi.